Hello. Great. I'd like to begin by introducing my guest here. Let's sit, shall we? Who is Claudia Perlich, Chief Scientist at Dstillery, which is an advertiser technology company that enables marketers to target prospects through scientific methods. And she is Chief Scientist. So before we dive in, did everybody get excited about all the graphs we saw in the last presentation? Okay, because we've prepared an exciting crash course in probability, statistics, and machine learning, and data science, and AI, all in the next 15 minutes. No, just kidding. I'm sorry. What we're actually here to talk about is leadership. So let me start by telling you a little bit about Claudia, and then we'll talk about her leadership. So prior to joining Dstillery in 2010, she worked at IBM's Watson Research Center, and she got a PhD in information systems from NYU, where she continues to teach at the Stern School of Business. She has so many accolades that I could spend 15 minutes just listing them off, but I've picked 5. She has over 50 published scientific articles. She's hit Crane's New York City 40 Under 40, Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People, multiple patents in machine learning. You're looking at me dubiously. This is all true. And she's won a number of data mining competitions. She's somebody that I've looked up to for a long time in the industry, so it's a pleasure to have her here. All right. Now, I began by telling you that the company that she works for has scientific methods in their whole mission statement, and she is chief scientist. So Claudia, can you tell us just a little bit about what your role as chief scientist actually entails?
So it was actually a very interesting question. I think my boss was asking himself for quite a while. It took them about 3 years to give me an official job description. And in the end, they came up with something that basically said it is 40% individual contribution. And that was back then when we were like a 20-people shop and I actually had to do stuff. 20% intellectual leadership, where it wasn't quite clear what that meant. And finally, 40% ambassadorship, like sitting here, talking to you, giving talks, just being the face of the company. And so this is still a little bit in the mix, and I will touch on them. And then a couple of years later, I was asked to join the executive team, which was a boys' club at that point. And I think they felt they wanted some calming influence. So I'm now much more involved also in kind of the managerial side and the strategic conversations, like what do we want to build, where we want to go, like what's the company doing. So I still love to code. I mean, I still actually love it when I have a day when I don't have to go to the office and can geek out and build stuff. But the relationship to the data science team is actually interesting. We have 15 people in data science, but I'm officially not managing any of them. So I'm in this kind of strange state where I don't have anybody reporting to me. And it's not because they didn't want to promote me or think I'm terrible at it. It's because when they hired me, I told them, I don't want to manage people. I hated to tell people what to do. Don't get me wrong. I love when people do what I want them to do, but not because I tell them, but because they agree that this might be the right thing to do. So that's the one side where I still feel I really get to kind of brainstorm with the team. They come to me when they have asked questions and consider me a resource. It's a little bit of mentorship, so I like the last questions of informal mentoring. And then on the management side, it's very often kind of a give and take when I need to be the kind of connector between the super techie, geeky stuff and what are we trying to do? So it's often kind of a feedback when they tell me, okay, we want to build this. And I says, well, you'll have to be a bit more precise. What do you mean by this? So helping to translate technical capabilities to some objectives that we're trying to do, and maybe sometimes challenging people whether they even know what they want to do, because often they don't.
So when Claudia was first telling me about this, I was thinking of it like a math word problem, right? The terror of, grade school students where you see the paragraph and there's some sort of a situation and you have to translate that into the math problem that you can actually solve. And it sounds to me like your role then is talking to the business folks, the other executives, and understanding the word problem and translating that into the mathematics or the machine learning problem to solve, and then going ahead and solving it, right?
yeah, I think this is, I don't have to solve it necessarily. That's where kind of all the great minds that we have in data science come into. But I've seen it fail so often when data scientists go off, geek out, and solve a completely irrelevant problem. And so I see this is the part that I play, and it's also the backwards translation. When I build something, I'm the only one who knows all the stuff under the rug that we usually don't talk about, and I feel it's my responsibility to tell you how far you can push this thing that I build and when it will start falling apart. And so when people, simple example, my CEO comes to me and asks me, okay, what's the average age of a cookie? I'm not talking of the ones out there, I'm talking of the kind of advertising cookies that track you. Now, why is that interesting? So I asked him, why do you want to know this? That we want to decide whether we need to invest into kind of collecting histories, but only if the average age is long enough that it makes any sense to keep these histories. The average age technically is something like an hour or two. The reason is there are so many cookies that live for exactly 0 seconds because they get reborn all the time. They have a 0 age. If I just run a query and ask, what's the average age of your cookie? The answer is 2 hours, which is completely useless. The truth is the cookies that are stable, 90 days. It's a completely different answer to a technically actually pretty specific question. But I need to know why you want to know. Because I want to know what you're going to do with this. And then I'm trying to give you the right answer for your problem.
Right. So understanding the context of the problem, like all the different pieces of that context, and then doing the translation before you actually go straight to solving it and the solution. So I think even if you don't do machine learning, oh, by the way, let's talk about the great power piece of machine learning. This is something that I like a lot.
So I sometimes, when I give talks, close at the end and saying, with great power, which is great data and great machine learning, comes great responsibility. And the cookie example is really trivial, but when we're talking about lives here, when people rely on data, my example is some work I did at IBM where we had to diagnose breast cancer. Now, this is serious business. You get fMRI data from Siemens, and you're trying to build the model that helps save people's lives. And as we played around, and that was one of these competitions, what we found out was that the patient identifier, the number assigned to you, was by far the most predictive variable. That number decided whether you had breast cancer or not. Now, every person who has any kind of background in machine learning would consider it's a pretty stupid idea to add the patient ID into a model in the first place. But what it really means, there's something very wrong with your data. This data you cannot use to build a model that will decide about life. And the only way I can tell is because I know it's not supposed to pick this signal up. And so at that point, I have to go back and challenge people and say, we can't do this. You have to go back and spend a year collecting better data. This is the responsibility that you bear when you're trying to put these technologies into practice.
So even though we may not all use machine learning or be trying to predict cancer, I put to you that we all have to solve problems in our business environments, whatever they may be. And so I think our takeaway from some of Claudia's perspective in the machine learning world is that if we focus on the understanding the problem and the translation piece in their own right before just jumping straight to the execution, the algorithm, the calculation, and trusting that, we'll get much better outcomes. But I also want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about something else you mentioned, which is very striking to me. So I lead a team of about 30 people here. I definitely have management responsibilities. But nonetheless, you have no management responsibilities and yet wield great authority and influence in your organization. And I think that's really interesting for all women who sometimes feel like they need to be granted authority in order to have influence. So I want to talk about that for you in particular. What is it, do you think, about your discipline or your team or your environment that makes that possible for you? Is it specific to machine learning?
So I started with that perspective as a personal preference because I didn't really like the idea, and I'm pretty sure that you have misgivings about some of your managerial responsibilities too. So I kind of got the best of all worlds. But
No comment.
I think the advantage in a field like data science is that if you do what you do well, it's not that hard to demonstrate impact and to show that you're good at what you're doing. It's a very measurable, at the end of the day, field where it's not a matter of subjective opinion, but I can often use data to make a very strong claim. And so if you are good at what you do, you have much less of an uphill battle and you get recognized for these things. It's a little bit easier. So maybe I had it easy on that one, that I didn't have to maybe fight that hard for authority because I could simply let my results, the products we build, speak for me. And I think there's also the upside if there is not a managerial relationship. People may feel more open to come to you with crazy ideas that they don't really know whether they are good because they don't fear your judgment. You're the person out there, and that ultimately, if there's a sense of a community and support of each other, I think that also plays a role because I do feel more accessible than if I was the direct manager that at the end makes a check mark and it determines how much of a bonus you're going to get.
It's awesome that that's successful. I mean, I do think that there's something specific about the technical discipline here that the machine learning ultimately does have objective, measurable outcomes. You can measure the prediction accuracy of your predictive model or whatever it is and say, look, my ideas and suggestions led to this better result, like objectively measurable. So you should listen to me next time. And it's not a matter of ego or personal opinion, right? You don't have to persuade people that you're right. You can just point to the numbers. And again, so trying to generalize outside of the machine learning world, I think for all of us, there's some sort of a measurable outcome that we're being judged by, presumably, whether it's revenue or customer satisfaction or whatever it is. And if you can point to, I'm summarizing, I'm paraphrasing for you on your behalf. If you can point to how you objectively move the needle, then you can have influence even without formal authority because people will know that you get objectively the right answers. Or the better
and I think
answers.
equally important is if you tell people when answers are wrong, I think if you are coming across as an unevolved equal in a conversation, people are open to criticism. And some of the one of the things I like to also use that power for is to give some pushback and, for instance, tell people, yes, in advertising, you want to advertise, you want to get a high click-through rate. I can tell you from a technical perspective, and I can prove to you this is a really bad strategy. Don't make me do it. I can. Yes, I can. Absolutely. It's a terrible idea because I know if you make me do it, I'll only show ads on the flashlight app. It's people fumbling in the dark. There will be very high click-through rate, and you will not reach a single person who is interested in buying your product. And here's the data and the analysis to prove that. So I think it also gives me the opportunity to be appreciated for kind of fair and open criticism without being personal about it, because I can let the data play that role.
Yeah, which comes back to the translator point, translating that back from the context of the problem in the first place. All right, well, I hope you're not too disappointed that we didn't get into some intricacies of machine learning, but maybe you have something to take home with you instead. And if you do want to pick our brains about data science, you can find us in the break. Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you.